From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for coming. Despite the bad weather, I'm delighted to see you all here for this very special program to celebrate with us the gift by the Afghan Media Resource Center to the Library of Congress, a gift of a unique digital archive of 94,650 photographs, 1,200 hours of videos, 350 hours of audio recordings on Afghanistan. That's the largest collection of its kind anywhere in the world. We're here today to recognize the work that was done by so many people in Afghanistan and in Washington, D.C. I'm Mary Jane Deeb, Chief of the African and Middle Eastern Division here at the Library of Congress, and I will be your host for the rest of the program. For the sake of time, I will introduce each speaker very briefly and have put on your seats their fuller bios. So you have the bios. So you can have a better idea of who each person is. Throughout the presentation, we will have a slideshow of some of the images from the archive that illustrate the wide range of subjects that are covered by this 30-year-long project. I will now begin by calling on the Acting Librarian of Congress, David Mao, who directs the operations of the Library of Congress and oversees this entire library, which is, as many of you know, the largest library in the world. He oversees its various units to ensure that the library services to Congress, the American people, and the world are provided effectively. So, David.
Thank you very much, Mary Jane, and good morning to all of you. As Mary Jane mentioned, my name is David Mao, and I have the privilege of serving as the acting librarian. I am very, very honored to be able to welcome all of you to the Library of Congress here today so that we can celebrate this very important project and learn more about the project, a product of cooperation between the Afghan Media Resource Center in Kabul and various U.S. government agencies, including the United States Department of State and the Library of Congress. As you can see on the slides on either side, the cooperation has produced unique photos. There's also video and audio digital archives in these archives on Afghanistan covering the period from 1987 to 2012. We now at the Library of Congress hold the digital copies of that archive, and we will eventually make it available to the public through our reading rooms. Over the next hour or so, you will hear from these distinguished speakers here at the table talking about how this project came about and really what does this archive mean to the world. Just a little bit of information. We are here in what's known as the Northeast Pavilion or the Government Pavilion here at the Library of Congress in the historic Thomas Jefferson Building. And as you can see, there are lots of symbols that represent this room, the government of the United States. The government itself in the medallion on the ceiling, and the representations around the wall of the different regions of our country, as well as different executive branch agencies within the United States, at least at the time that this building was created. So you'll see representations of the Treasury and State Department, Justice and Post Office Departments, Agriculture and Interior, War and Navy. And I think in a way that these representations symbolize very well the Afghan Media Resource Center collection here at the Library of Congress, because these themes that are represented on these walls can also be seen in these digital representations, whether it be in the pictures or in the audiovisual materials in the collection. They talk about different regions in the area. They talk about different things that happen, whether it's sharing a meal together or a negotiation, whether it's building or destruction, whether it's dying or planting and enjoying bountiful harvest. These are all represented by the different areas in our country and in the different symbols of the departments that we represent here. So I think it's particularly fitting that we're in this room to be able to talk about this collection. So with that said, I'm very glad that all of you are here today to hear about this very special gift and to hear from those folks who have been instrumental in making this all happen. I know you really enjoy hearing about the archives, the story about its creation and the way it came about, and I hope it will inspire you to come and learn more about the Library of Congress, not only to use these materials to look at them, but also to look at them for research, and also perhaps to look at more of the materials here in the collection of the Library of Congress from around the world that are preserved here and can be used for all of you. So with that, I want to thank you again and welcome you to the Library of Congress.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Well, thank you, David. He has an extremely busy schedule, and he has come specially to be with us today. So we really appreciate this. And before I introduce our speakers, I would like to recognize and thank some of the people who made this project possible. First, I would like to thank the Afghan Media Resource Center and its director, Haji Saeed Dawood, who is with us today, and all the MRC staff who have produced the original photos and videos and then organized, archived, and stored these materials, and later worked tirelessly to produce the metadata in Pashto, Dari, English, as well as in translation and in transliteration. That transliteration is the complex library system that transcribes phonetically various scripts, in this case Dari and Pashto, into Roman script. Without this metadata, this collection could not have been absorbed by the Library of Congress. Haji Dawood is an extraordinary man who has dedicated his life to recording in photos and videos the history of Afghanistan in the last 3 decades. He has created the single most important record of Afghan contemporary history and society in existence anywhere today. He has accomplished this feat by training Afghan journalists whom he has sent to every region of Afghanistan to film, videotape, record, and photograph the life of ordinary Afghans. And as the librarian said, in war and peace, in planting and harvesting, in negotiation and in fighting, in bringing up children, in caring for the living and caring for the dead. He has risked his life many times so that this unique record of Afghanistan's history is preserved, and so that the world becomes aware of what the people of Afghanistan have been through in the last 3 decades. In my mind, he's a hero who has brought his life's work to us here at the library so that we can store and preserve it and make it available to scholars and researchers and to all who want to know more about Afghanistan. Having said this, I move on to the speakers, and I would like to thank the Department of State, here represented by U.S. Ambassador Peter Thompson, who has been a tireless supporter of the AMRC project and has met on a number of occasions with the Library of Congress executives to make the case for the importance of this archive and the need to have it included in the library's collections. I want to thank Tess Del Pret, who is here representing the State Department also, without whose financial support to the Afghan Media Resource Center, this project could not have materialized or have become part of the Library of Congress's collections. I also want to thank Steve Olson, who is sitting here at the table, for having helped with the founding of AMRC in 1986, and for returning years later, as you will hear, to take on the training of the AMRC staff to digitize this collection for the Library of Congress. He did so with Nick Mills, who is with us. He's a professor of journalism at Boston University who spent 12 hours at Logan Airport to come and see us due to weather issues. And he trained also Afghan journalists for the MRC in 1986, and then returned to Kabul for this project for the Library of Congress. Steve has come all the way from California to be with us today, and Nick, as we pointed out, all the way from Boston. I want to thank Library Services, here represented by the Associate Librarian for Library Services, Mark Sweeney, and the Director of Collection and Services, Helena Zinkham, who unfortunately could not be with us. But they have provided support for this project and have recognized its importance. My thanks go to my colleague, Greg Luco, who is sitting here, and his staff for the incredible work they have done with the video and audio recordings. Greg will recognize those in the motion picture and recorded sound who have worked on this project later in the program. Thanks go to Hira Dinavari from my division, who has worked closely with me throughout this project and has been enormously helpful in numerous ways, including being responsible for reviewing the metadata in Dari, English, and in transliteration. Thanks go to Ruhul Yousafzai and Phong Tran, also at the library, who reviewed the metadata in Pashto, to Marzeya Rafi and Michael Shayat for their help with cataloging issues. Sam Manavong has done incredible work with the photos. He is responsible for uploading these into the library system and also making available these photos today. And thanks to Mike Newbert, to whom we went time and again for advice on IT procedures regarding the inclusion of this collection into the library system. My role in this project has been that of bringing people together who needed to work together. I met Haji Dawood 8 years ago when he came to the library to see if there was any way we could work together to digitize and preserve his endangered collection in Kabul. Endangered because it was threatened by war, by conflict, but also by natural elements such as dampness, extreme cold or extreme heat, insects, etc. Together we worked to get copyright permissions, set up an operational budget, and get the library's approval for the project. With Ambassadors Peter Thompson, Jim Hoagland, and Michael Malinowski, who are all present here today, we met then with Associate Librarian Deanna Markham and explained the importance of that archive. She gave me the green light to pursue this project and agreed that the library should hold a digital copy of these materials if we were able to make this project work. For 4 years, we searched for funding for the project. And then, in a perfect Library of Congress way, a perfect story, someone from the Department of State came to the library seeking a project for the preservation of Afghan patrimony that the Office of Public Diplomacy could fund. The rest is history. The US Embassy in Kabul was notified, applications were filled, the grant was given, and the work began. The people on this panel will tell you their part of the story, and I will stop here only to add that this huge and very complex project was completed in record time, stayed within budget, which is a feat in itself, and that those digitized materials and their metadata are now safely here at the library. And now, let me introduce the next speaker, Peter Thompson. And Peter has been working with us ever from the very beginning. And again, I will introduce people very briefly. Ambassador Peter Thompson's 32-year diplomatic career focused primarily on South Asia, China, and the Soviet Union. He was the US Special Envoy to the Afghan resistance with the title of ambassador from 1989 to 1993, and served as US ambassador to Armenia. So we've had him here before on another topic. He is the author of The Wars of Afghanistan, Messianic Terrorism, Tribal Conflicts, and the Affairs of Great Powers. Peter Thompson.
Thanks, Mary Jane, for the pitch on the book. Today, we celebrate the integration of a copy of the huge Afghan Media Resource Center archive into the Library of Congress's world-renowned collection of records and knowledge. In doing so, we pay tribute to Acting Librarian of Congress David Mao, who just spoke, and all of the fabulous Library of Congress staff who were engaged in this long-term AMRC digitization project. Dr. Mary Jane Deeb, as she indicated here, was our coordinator throughout the process during this 8-year journey to get to the finish line. Crossing it would not have been possible, however, without the dedication and hard work of Mary Jane's colleagues, whom she has just highlighted. Director Haji Saeed Daoud and his AMRC office were already fully operational when I first arrived in Peshawar as Special Envoy in June 1989. Before leaving Washington on my first trip to the region, I met several Hill staffers who had helped launch AMRC. In the early 1980s, a bipartisan group of senators and congressmen took the lead in appropriating funds to get AMRC off the ground. Notably, Senator Humphrey, Senator Dole, Senator Byrd, and Congressman Charlie Wilson and Don Ritter. But as always in Congress, the congressional staffs did the heavy lifting behind the scenes to make this happen. We are very fortunate to have a major player in that process of guiding the AMRC legislation and appropriations through Congress with us today. Mike Pillsbury, would you please stand up? Mike is in the front row here. And as I mentioned, a major player in getting this done. Tom Klein, who was with Mike on Senator Humphrey's staff and in Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he was set to fly here this morning with his wife and join us, but because of the inclement weather, he could not come. I'd also like to mention two other staffers who stand out on the Hill who helped get AMRC going, Charlie Schnabel and Dick D'Amato. Early on, there were many State Department and USI officials in Pakistan and in Washington who played critical roles in assisting Haji Daoud at the AMRC. Time prevents me from naming all of them present and not present, but three stand out for their vital contributions. One is with us today, Richard Hoagland. Would you please stand up, Dick? I'm sorry, the two are with us today. John Dixon is here too. Would you please stand up, John, please? And Mike Malinowski. In her remarks, Mary Jane Deeb gave well-deserved praise to the State Department's indispensable role in facilitating and funding the AMRC digitization project. We are happy that Tess Delpret from State South and Central Asia Bureau is also with us today and will be speaking. The AMRC's coverage of the Afghan wars began in 1986 and ended in 2012. 75% of the archive, the heart of the collection, focuses on the 9-year blood-soaked Soviet-Afghan War, during which 1 million Afghans perished, plus the 3 additional years it took for the Mujahideen to overthrow the Soviet-sponsored Najib regime. The archive contains many thousands of news items brought back by AMRC media teams from inside Afghanistan during the Soviet occupation. They, as David Isby mentioned, had Afghan eyes on the war and reported it through the AMRC Afghan institution, which was devoted in Peshawar to tracking the Afghan war. The news reports, their news reports portray the desperate fighting and the valiant spirit of the Afghan people. The teams gave their microphones to Afghans, village elders, women, children, Afghan commanders, and their mujahideen inside the country, allowing them to speak directly to a worldwide audience. The archive also carries reports from Pakistan, from the refugee camps, from various mujahideen headquarters, from diplomats in foreign embassies and consulates that were watching and reporting on the Afghan war. I met with Haji Daud in his AMRC office on every visit to Peshawar. It was completely an Afghan operation. An AK-47 leaned on his bed in a corner room, attesting to the dangers that he faced every day. No foreigners were present, only Afghans. They were all young, dedicated, and well-trained. When not editing film or processing photos, they were going back and forth into Afghanistan, operating out of Mujahideen areas, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, bringing windows on the war in every Afghan region to audiences around the globe. Let's now pause for a moment, if you will, to ponder why the AMRC archive, built by Haji Daud and his AMRC journalists, is so unique and indeed so historically important. In large part, the answer lies in the relative paucity of reliable reportage of the war following the 1979 Soviet invasion. In the US and internationally, it is easy to access the prolific media coverage of World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, not to mention the post-9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But there is a huge gap, almost, I would say, a blank space regarding on-the-ground coverage of the Soviet-Afghan war. Some of you in this room made it past Pakistani border guards and Soviet outposts to report on the fighting, but not many Western journalists and cameramen were able to venture for long periods inside most of Afghanistan. Soviet propaganda, of course, was bountiful throughout this period, but it delivered a false and cynical narrative of the true situation inside the country. The vast, usually originally sourced AMRC archive, now housed in the Library of Congress, will fill this nearly blank space. For the decades to come, it will be the most authentic source for anyone, anywhere, seeking accurate information on the Soviet-Afghan war, to include historians, scholars, authors, policymakers, inside and outside governments, members of the media, the military, diplomats, and politicians. And the archive's importance does not end, as Haji Daud will tell you, with the Soviet-backed Najib regime's overthrow in 1992. For in the global strategic context, Afghanistan had been a major battlefield of the Cold War, one that had sped the collapse of the last political totalitarian empire of the 20th century. But then, sadly and immediately, Afghanistan became a major battlefield against the first religious totalitarian movement of the 21st century, and that conflict, tragically, continues today without let-up. In closing, let us again hail Haji Saeed Daud for his many achievements as a director of AMRC, for his courage, and for his persistence in overcoming the most daunting obstacles in his path, and also the Library of Congress for accepting and digitizing the entire AMRC archive and making it available in 3 languages to all. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear from the man himself, from Haji Saeed Dawood, the director of the Afghan Media Resource Center, who will give us a brief overview of 30 years of his work.
Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be among my family, friends, and colleagues. I would like to thank the staff at the Library of Congress for putting together this ceremony. If I telling you that story, I think that's for last 30 years. We have just 3 or 5 minutes we don't have enough time. Just what about MRC? The Afghan Media Resource Center set up by Afghan professional by funding of Boston University in 1986. The person who came first, that was Nick Mills and his 3 colleagues. Please. Nick Mills and Steve and their another 2 colleagues, they started training program for the Afghan refugees. They started training in video, photo, print reporting. When they finished that training for the first session, they started second session of training. In that time, just I was written proposal for production. When these young Afghan refugees graduated from this training, what will be the future for these people? I think when we finished the second session of the training, many of my colleagues, I'm glad they are here, John Dixon, Dick Hoagland, and Brett Hanson. We worked together in that time with Steve and Nick. MRC set up appointment with all these political leaders. And I met these guys, all the political leaders. And I asked them, look, these are your son and brothers, they got training. And they equipped by Boston University. We want to coverage Afghanistan situation, which that was very tough in that time, because all the foreign journalists, they are sitting in Peshawar, and they are making report from inside of Afghanistan. Few of these film producers, I think included Steve Olson, they visited Peshawar camps and they did their documentaries. I think one of these people, which is very, they did a great job in that time. His name is Sandigal. Sandigal and his crew, which is Peter Juvenal, and also the guy, his name is Andy. They are 3 British-based film producers. They, for the first time, they travel to north of Afghanistan, and they also shooted film from Salang and for all were the Badakhshan and Baghlan and Takhar provinces. All these and other documentaries in 1980s, in the early 80s, just they producing from Peshawar and Quetta camps, or some of them they went to like Nangarhar, Kunard, Paktia, Kandahar. Nobody coverage from Samangan, Bamiyan, Balkh, Faryab, Badghis, Ghor, Uruzgan. When we did finish the training and we spoke with the political leaders, and I asked them for support letters, and also they must give us some representative. In all these parties, they gave us support letter. We support this mission, and they introduced us their representative, which is last former President Hamid Karzai was representative of Mujahideen Party. They called them Afghanistan National Liberation Front. MRC put an advisory board for all these Afghans who are intellectual, who belong to the parties. We started production. In 3 months, we started distribution. I think Steve did a trip to London, and he talked with Viz News, ITN, WTN, and CNN, because nobody knows about Afghan Media Resource Center. That was the first time these people thinking, oh, the Afghan cameraman, the Afghan producer, photographer, they are doing their own coverage. And also, he did talk with the Camera Press, Sigma, Black Star, and these photo agencies. We started our distribution. In that time, I don't want to mention the name of the people, just that is very, very important, because in the beginning, we did a proposal. This is Independent Media Center. In that time, General Ziaulak and Prime Minister Junejo, he tried to take over this project to one of the political party. I think our friends, some of them there, he is here. I don't want to mention his name because I don't have permission. And just Mr. Rafael, who was ambassador in Islamabad, and he passed away in the crash with Ziaulak, and he stand there, support the MRC, and talk with Golden Humphrey, and Golden Humphrey directly called Ziaulak. And later, Ziaulak and Junejo agree the MRC will be independent. And second time, that was, I think, Phyllis Oakley is here, and also Robert Oakley was the ambassador of United States in Islamabad. We are very good friends in that time. And Peter Thompson was also special envoy. In the General Hamid Gul, he tried to transfer MRC to AIG. They call them Afghanistan Interim Government. And these guys asking them, we couldn't support MRC when you guys want to transfer that to AIG. And this is Independent Center. That was the second time. And just we did a coverage from 1986 to 2012. That coverage is included Soviet invasion, internal fighting of Mujahideen, Taliban period, and also 9/11 post-war of Afghanistan, what going on there until today. The thing is, these materials belong to all 34 provinces of Afghanistan, and that is contain more than 30 subjects, like agriculture, education, fighting, demining, election, human rights, women's rights. We did collect all these material, like 3,000 hours videos, 150,000 photographs and slides, and 2,000 hours audio. When I met Mary Jane Deeb for the first time, that was January 9, 2008. And I think John Dixon was also with me in that meeting. I asked her, what about this material? Because that's very difficult to keep the quality of the videos and audios and photos. She told me, that's fine, and you can approve that. This is your material, or this is belong to you. Because we are wondering, maybe someone else or the Afghan government can mentioning this material belong to Afghanistan. Finally, I got back to Kabul. I called Mr. Karzai offices, Hamid Karzai, and I set up appointment with him. And I asked him, look, President Karzai, if you need this archive, I want to donate it to the government, because this is the property of Afghan nation. This is not my own property. I did that for the Afghan nation, Afghan people. Just he was quiet for 1 minute, and after 1 minute, he gave me answer, Haj Dawood, you can keep them. Because if you donate it to us, my staff will be selling that material to the private TVs. I asked them, please, I need a letter from you. You can write a letter. This is MRC's, his own property, belongs to Haj Dawood. And he asked the Culture and Information Minister, and he did write that letter to me, and I collected all the registration, titles, and letter of cultural information minister, and I brought them to Mary Jane Deeb. It take 1 year. Mary Jane Deeb also follow up that procedure. Later, we get to the U.S. Embassy in Kabul for the fund, which is Mary Jane Deeb mentioning. She spoke here in Washington, D.C. I spoke there in Kabul Embassy, which the guy, Taj Malik Khan Taj, he's working for Voice of America. He was also in that meeting because he worked for the public affairs offices there in Kabul. We did set a proposal in 2011. I recommended to my colleagues who are voluntarily working with the MRC, Nick Mills and Steve Olson. I asked Mary Jane Deeb, I can recommend it to you, these two guys, they can come to Washington, D.C., and they can get a training, and they can return back to Afghanistan. These two guys got a training, and they got back to Kabul, and they trained our staff. You can maybe see the videos and photos. And we started with our Afghan colleagues, and we selected 1,200 hours video from 3,000, and also we selected 94,652 photographs and slides, and also we selected 357 hours audios, which is that selective material like Mary Jane Deeb mentioning, that's with a metadata in 3 languages, Pashto, Dari, and English. And finally, I can tell you this is not the work of one person. If I tell you the reality, 120 Afghan professionals was for the production with the MRC. In 30 Afghans, they working with the digitization because it take also 7 years. We started 2008 and we finished it by December 2015. This is not the journey of one person, of not work of the one person. 150 Afghans was involved with it. And also there is more than 10 foreigners, professionals, included Steve Olson and Nick Mills from 1986 to 2015. They stay with us and they give us advice all the time. We change emails and telephone conversation. And now I'm happy this material will be gifting one copy, one digitized copy to the library. The student, scholar, and also journalists can use it here. Maybe some of our Afghan colleagues, they must be thinking, what about Afghanistan? Because you are Afghan, you grow up there, you went to university, you're working for national radio and TV, and you put this material here in the library. What about Afghanistan? I already did 2 digitized copy. Same copy, 1 copy for Kabul University Library, 1 copy for the national radio and TV. The problem is, right now in Afghanistan, there is no copyright. I hope they must be fixed that problem, and I can donate it to the Afghan students and scholars and researchers. And thanks again from Mary Jane Deeb, who did a lot of work with us, and she was organized all the things, and thanks for her staff, and also thanks from Grigory Loko. He's chief of broadcasting division, and he did a lot with us, and we video, audios. I appreciate his work and also his staff work. And thank you. Thanks from the State Department. They funding this project. And I think in the beginning, we estimated maybe $1 million project or 600,000 project, and Medellin knows that we did that with less money. And we calculated cent by cent. I'm glad the used taxpayer money is not wasted. And because in these days, everybody talking about Afghanistan, there is corruption, the people is involved with that. And we calculated cent by cent, dollar by dollar with the US Embassy people in Kabul. I think the guy who did with me, his name is Michael Hoff. He calculated all this audit reports. And also, thanks for all our friends and colleagues. They join us in this historic event. And thank you again, and thank you for coming in this rainy day. Thanks a lot.
And as Haji Dawood has pointed out, we have one copy, and copies of those wonderful materials remain in Afghanistan. So the patrimony is preserved both here and there. And so those materials will become available for the use of readers and researchers very soon. And now to the next speaker, Steve Olson. Steve was there at the very beginning, as Haji Dawood has pointed out. He is the president of Cultural and Educational Media since 1983. He has produced and directed documentary films, television series, and feature news reports throughout the world for US and European broadcasters, and has won numerous national and international awards. And you have the forms, you can read more about him and his work. And he's going to share with us a few minutes of his own experience with AMRC. Sir.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Salam alaikum. Greetings, everyone. It's truly a joy to be here. I don't know if we ever foresaw this day, but it's such a pleasure to celebrate the fruition of all this work that Haji's just described, and to be a small part of that. I did have the great pleasure to travel through Afghanistan in the 1970s as an undergraduate anthropology student. I was able to visit various parts of the country, a fascinating and strikingly beautiful country and culture that made a profound effect on me, and I think that's what kept bringing me back to Afghanistan. In those times, many Afghans called these times the golden years, and they still burn brightly in my memory as a time of great hospitality, great friendship, adventure, and exchange with so many of the warm, generous people that I met in Afghanistan. And also committed Westerners, even at that time, such as Louis and Nancy Dupre, who sent me to their research villages in Al-Kaprok, near Sheberghan and Maimana, parts of Afghanistan that were so precious prior to the Soviet invasion. And I really felt so blessed to have been there and met wonderful people. This so-called golden year period ended, of course, on December 24th, 79, with the Soviet invasion. The Soviet-Afghan War had begun with a brutal foreign occupying military force. And as a lover of Afghanistan and now a filmmaker, I returned in '83 to make a documentary film about the early successes of the Afghan resistance. The film was called Afghanistan, The Fight for a Way of Life. I'm mentioning this because as I left Afghanistan, I gave my film camera and many rolls of film footage to my Afghan photographer friends, because it was clear to me, I think and many other filmmakers who were there, or the few other filmmakers that were there, that there were parts of Afghanistan that we just could not visit any longer. It was too risky. We would be spotted. I dyed my hair dark brown and a dark brown beard. I did that 3 or 4 trips. It just got increasingly dangerous, and it was obvious that Afghans were needed to get close to the story, what was really happening. Back in the US, I happened to meet Tom Gutierre and Mukim Ramanzai from the University of Nebraska Center for Afghanistan Studies. They liked my PBS documentary and subsequently hired me to draft the media component for their proposal to establish an Afghan Media Resource Center. Nebraska had the academics, they had the real Afghan area experts, but no communications people. And as you know, Boston University had all the communications people, but no real Afghan expertise. I consulted in Omaha for a week. I went back to Pakistan to show my film to the Afghans who appeared in it, and I happened to see in the Muslim English language newspaper in Peshawar, a team of trainers had arrived from Boston University to establish a training project for Afghans in University Town, which was so bizarre because the University of Nebraska never told me who finally got that grant. Here I was back in Peshawar, and I hop in a rickshaw and go to Canal Bank Road, where I meet Nick Mills. And this amazing feeling that's so happy to be there, so happy the other trainers and everything, so happy it was going on, but somehow feeling, after being so involved in the content, being oblivious to how this all happened. Anyway, Nick and I hit it off, and Nick recommended me to the Boston University Dean, Joachim Matra, who a few days later sent me a business class ticket to come to Boston immediately for an interview, where after a few hours of questioning, I was hired to be the US project director, project manager, with a mandate to find an Afghan director and an Afghan staff. So Nick had set up meetings with Mujahideen parties, as Haji mentioned. Haji came to visit the AMRC with the Jamiat Islami group. Haji had a journalism degree. He was a television producer. He worked both with news and with cultural programming, which I thought was so important. We got along very well professionally and otherwise, and in this sea of war, refugees, spies, and vast amounts of well-meaning money, of all the Afghans that I had met, Haji Daoud struck me as an extremely honest and trustworthy man. So with Nick and my recommendation, Boston officially hired Haji Daoud to be the AMRC director. He's a politically astute media professional who had wonderful contacts with all the Afghan resistance parties, as well as with exiled Afghan journalists. When I say all of the resistance parties, I must say he also connected with Shia groups from different parts of Afghanistan. Haji Daoud was talking to Hazara commanders, journalists, and as you've come to learn, many of you, through the big Shia-Sunni divide, this was in Afghanistan very important. We started our first week training session and then started dispatching crews to different parts of the country with video and photo cameras, story ideas, and even specific shot lists. We had 25 new video camera packages to assign, 50 35mm photo cameras, audio cassette recorders, and lots of work to do. Haji Nick and I tried to spend time with the cameramen before they left, reminding them that in addition to generating the combat-related footage and stories, which was their primary assignment, to also document Afghan cultural life, weddings, Nowruz celebrations, New Year celebrations, children, families, and other social events. It should be mentioned that this war was called the Hidden War because for years virtually no Western journalists were willing to take the risks to go deeply into Afghanistan. As Haji mentioned, there were no reports coming from central Afghanistan or from the far west or the far north, where it would require often 9-10 days of travel to reach the location. So for the next year and a half, under Haji's direction, the AMRC dispatched over 100 2- to 3-man crews to all parts of Afghanistan, mostly to places with no electricity, no battery chargers, no phone service, and no roads. Our AMRC news teams, sometimes delayed for weeks due to bad weather or being detained by local warlords, would eventually return to Peshawar and sit down with our editors to create our weekly AMRC news reports, which we would then rush to send via DHL to syndication services in London, like Viz News, which is the parent company of Reuters. These services would check our stories for accuracy and professionalism and then feed weekly AMRC stories to over 245 broadcasters in over 100 countries worldwide. Meanwhile, AMRC photos were being distributed through Sigma, Black Star, and AFP. The AMRC was starting to achieve some of its goals. Then on December 31st, 87, Boston University and Dean Yochum Matra were suddenly phased out of the project. As Boston left, I agreed to stay on as the senior media advisor, now to an AMRC that was finally independent, run totally by Afghans with no American bosses or supervision. Then after setting up the international distribution, I was able to do, as the British say, make myself redundant and leave the project totally to Haji and his staff, which was a shared dream of Nick Mills and mine from the beginning, that we should phase ourselves out of this as soon as possible. Peter Thompson, Ambassador Thompson, did a wonderful job describing the significance of the project. What I would only like to add is I think the AMRC was finally able to open a window on this hidden war and generate news reports and documentation from 25 of Afghanistan's then 29 provinces, reports that made an impact on viewers and governments throughout the world. In the process, more than 20 of our journalists and cameramen were injured, and 2 of our cameramen, Mohammed Hassan from Kandahar and Khanullah from Pagman, were killed while on assignment for the AMRC. Nick Mills says the best thing he did for the AMRC was to find me, and I say the best thing I did for the AMRC was to hire Haji Daoud as project director. Aside from the management and professional results, there was no theft, fraud, or embezzlement, practices which you've heard have achieved epidemic proportions in this new US-funded Afghanistan. Haji has run an honorable, focused, tight ship for almost 30 years. His directors of all departments have stayed with him for almost 30 years, reappeared for this archive project. Admirable to see such long-term faith in real professional Afghans. In 2002, Haji and I worked together, first drafting a proposal for funding an archive at Williams College, and then again after September 11th with other friends, many of whom are in the room, on a new proposal and budget to the US Embassy in Kabul. The AMRC archives would be transferred onto the highest quality, uncompressed digital files with accompanying metadata to provide contextual information, accessibility, and relevance over time, over decades, and even over centuries. I remember speaking with Greg Luco and James Snyder here at the LOC about this thing we call time, and especially as a filmmaker, I was amazed to hear that these guys think of preservation in terms of 300 to 500 years or more. So I think today is a fine day for Haji Daoud, for the AMRC, and for Afghanistan. I'd like to finish by showing you a short video that I put together very quickly about the digital capturing and the corresponding metadata logs that were designed to make this body of material accessible to Afghans and non-Afghans alike. This is just 3 minutes long, but hopefully will give you a sense of the people and the project. The Afghan Media Resource Center was founded in Peshawar, Pakistan in 1987. The goal was to train Afghan journalists to document the Afghan-Soviet War throughout Afghanistan's 29 provinces. Instructors from Boston University trained over 125 Afghan journalists, photographers, and video cameramen. Each of the Afghan resistance parties nominated candidates for training. Haji Saeed Daoud was selected to be the AMRC project director. Video reports produced by the AMRC were soon broadcast by the BBC, CNN, WTN, and other news syndication outlets in more than 120 countries around the world. AMRC photographs were distributed internationally by Sigma Photo Agency and Agence France Presse. Over 7 years, the AMRC accumulated an archive of approximately 3,000 hours of videotape, 100,000 negatives and slides, and 500 hours of audio recordings. This was the largest documentation of life inside Afghanistan from during the Afghan-Soviet era. In 2011, the U.S. Embassy in Kabul provided a grant to digitize and preserve the AMRC video, photo, and audio archives at the Library of Congress. Long-term AMRC project advisors Nick Mills and Stephen Olson are tutored at the LOC to pass on the necessary training to the Afghan archivists. The digitization of materials and the metadata descriptions in Dari, Pashto, and English take over 3 years to complete. AMRC Archive Director Kamaluddin Kuchi is joined by his son Salahuddin, now an Al Jazeera producer, who supervises the digitization of this 30-year-old video material. The old and often dirty original tapes require constant cleaning of the video heads for a clean digital transfer. According to the Library of Congress precise specifications, the metadata for each photo and video event is logged in English, Pashto, Dari, Romanized Pashto, and Romanized Dari. A copy of all this work will also be available in Kabul. The AMRC archive provides a unique resource for understanding Afghanistan and one of the most important conflicts of the last half of the 20th century. The preservation of this AMRC collection will be a great asset to scholars, journalists, and students. The AMRC archive will now support historical, cultural, and political research from this unique society and era for hundreds of years to come. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Nick. Actually, it gives us a view on the other side, which I had not seen before. So, thank you very much. And now, to represent the State Department, Tess Delpret has served as the chief of the Afghanistan-Pakistan Grants and Programs Division within the Office of Press and Public Diplomacy in the Bureau of South and Central Asia at the U.S. Department of State since 2013, and oversees all federal assistance programming for public diplomacy in Afghanistan and Pakistan in this capacity. And of course, it was thanks to the Department of State and thanks to the grant that AMRC received that this project was made possible. So, Tess, would you like to join us here?
Good afternoon, Dr. Mao, Ambassador Hoagland, Ambassador Thompson, and other dignitaries and friends. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to this warm celebration on this very rainy day. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to be here in support of the ultimate success of the AMRC and its achievement and its presentation to the Library of Congress today. As has already been mentioned, In 1986, the United States Information Agency, or USIA, supported the creation of the Afghan Media Resource Center, and with it, the creation of one of Afghanistan's first independent news agencies. The AMRC trained journalists to cover the Soviet occupation and then for years collected reports from all available forms of media. In 2011 and 12, with the help of the State Department and others, the AMRC digitalized this record to create what is being presented here today. Now, a lot of my colleagues on the panel have already spoken quite a bit about the significance to this, but I want to continue on with that a little bit and mention that this is quite special in that it provides not only a political narrative of Afghanistan's past, but also a glimpse into the human tragedy that ensued during and after this difficult era. It is a record made not by the international community, but by the Afghan people, of the Afghan people, and as such presents a local perspective to the world, a perspective that may not have otherwise been accessible. In these days of global and cross-cultural conflict and strife, the value of contextualized social history cannot and should not be underestimated. A lot has changed in Afghanistan since the days of the Soviet occupation. And while conflict is still apparent, Afghanistan has made remarkable progress since the partnership between our two countries began. We heard a lot about how the Afghan Media Resource Center was created and the significance and why it was important. And I appreciate the comments from my colleagues on the panel that explained what it was like on the ground at that time. But I'd like to talk a little bit more about where Afghanistan is right now and where we're hoping to go. Besides the progress in the security sector, Afghanistan's civil society has made leaps and bounds. Progress in democratic development, economic growth, infrastructure and transportation, health, education, and women's empowerment. Afghanistan's communication sector has grown exponentially. As of 2015, Afghanistan has a free and dynamic press with over 75 television stations and 200 radio stations that together reach over 70% of Afghan households. Household TV ownership has risen to 58% from 37% in 2007, and internet use has nearly doubled in urban areas over the past year. Print, electronic, and social media outlets reflect a range of views, and while risk remains, there is increasing space for journalists to challenge government policies and bring attention to human rights concerns and to report on instances of corruption or abuse. Afghanistan has numerous human rights and civil society organizations that bravely do the same and are working to advance and sustain concrete improvements for Afghanistan's people. And while there is still work to be done, the changes underway in Afghanistan cannot be measured by numbers alone. Afghanistan is steadily becoming a country where citizens can celebrate the achievement of their own sports teams on the international stage, watch their own television serials, enjoy their own musicians, vote for their own leaders, and listen to their own pundits debate public policy. Our relationship in the years to come will not be defined by war, but by development assistance and diplomatic support to sustain the gains of the past decade toward a sovereign, stable, unified, and democratic Afghanistan. The United States looks forward to working with the new Afghan government based on the principles of mutual respect and mutual accountability. But I want to say a warm and hearty congratulations on your fine achievement. Besides being a treasure trove of historically rich and textured data, the archive is perhaps more importantly a shining beacon of the undeniable resilience of the Afghan people. Thank you very much for my invitation today.
Thank you, Tess. And now I want to move to Greg Luco. Greg Luco and I are the two bookends, if you want, of this panel. We represent the library. We hold together this project from one side and the other. Greg Luco is the chief of the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, headquartered at the library's Packard campus for audiovisual conservation in Culpeper, Virginia. He drove for 2 hours to be here with us today. And he oversees the world's largest collection of films, television, and radio broadcasts and sound recordings. And so we're delighted that he has agreed to include within that large collection of films the films that came from AMRC. He has many achievements, which you will find on the list you have. And now let us hear from Greg Luco.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. On behalf of all of my colleagues and the staff of the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, also known here at the library as the Motion Picture Broadcast and Recording Sound Division, all of my colleagues who were involved in this project over the last several years, it is certainly a great pleasure to be here with you today to celebrate this milestone, the completion of the digitization of the AMRC collection, its conveyance to the library as a donation, and its preservation at the Packard campus of the library in Culpeper, Virginia. I'm here just to finish putting in the final brushstrokes of the picture that we've been creating, or perhaps a more apt metaphor is the final pixels of the HD video that we hope you will all come away with in your minds at the end of this panel. Our role at the Packard campus was basically twofold: to help with Stephen and his colleagues in the technical setup for the digitization of the files, and secondly, of course, the preservation of the digital collection of the AMRC collection. We began working back in 2011 and 2012 with Stephen to configure the digitization workstations. I think it was a couple of iMacs that we put together. It was the first time that Apple had included the Thunderbolt data transfer ports and cables on their iMacs, and that greatly facilitated the process. Stephen mentioned one of my colleagues, James Snyder, who was our technical lead on this project. He sat down and identified the digital capture station, the analog to digital converter that would be hooked up to these iMacs, and the software that goes along with it. So he configured and he tested the workstations that we ultimately shipped to Kabul for the AMRC to digitize all this together. That was actually an important development for us on our side as well, because we've used those systems internally since then. We then worked with the AMRC staff and Mary Jane's staff to configure the metadata. You know you're in a library when 3 of the panelists mention the word metadata over and over again. That's very important. The metadata accompanying all those digital files that we were going to receive from the AMRC would enable us to ingest the files into our preservation systems, and ultimately will enable their discovery by researchers coming to the library. Ultimately, we received 44 hard drives, each one I think was about 3 terabytes each, that were shipped to us by Haji Daoud and his staff. We downloaded all the content from those hard drives, those 44 hard drives, into our Packard campus data center, our digital archive. Just to repeat the vital statistics, over 1,200 hours of video, 357 hours of audio, and 94,652 photographs and slides. Total 125 terabytes of digital content were added to our Packard campus data center, joining the nearly 7 petabytes of other audiovisual content that we store at the Packard campus. All of the library's audiovisual content is stored there. The collection is now securely preserved at the Packard campus. It's backed up, as any good digital archive should be, at a mirrored off-site second location that the library has. All this in addition to the copies of the materials in the collection that remain available in Afghanistan, as Haji Daud mentioned. As a next step, we look forward to collaborating with Mary Jane and her division to produce the digital access copies of the master preservation files that we're storing to make the entire collection available for on-site access by researchers in Ahmed's reading rooms here, right over there, and in our Moving Image Research Center and our Recorded Sound Research Center, which are located in the library's Madison building. For the work that is completed and all that lies ahead, I'd like to acknowledge a few of my staff, my colleagues at the Packard campus, as Mary Jane did her staff. In our Moving Image section, Mike Michon and especially Andrea Lee, who is the head of our processing unit within the Moving Image section. Similarly, in our Recorded Sound section, Jean Deanna, the head of the section, and Catlin Hunter, the head of the processing unit in the Recorded Sound section. Also our technology office, Stephen Neese, our Chief Technology Officer, and most especially, I already mentioned James Snyder, who had been our technical lead on this project and collaborated with Haji and Stephen and others on the technical aspects. It has been a great pleasure to work with Haji Daud and all of his colleagues in Kabul, some of whom I just saw pictured for the first time. It was actually quite moving. Like Mary Jane, I saw all that for the first time. Haji called to my attention a couple of his colleagues that had been instrumental in all of the technical aspects of this. Kamaluddin Kochi, deputy of the AMRC and the head of the archive, who I think you saw pictured in the video, as well as Mohammed Tariq Ikram, the production manager and financial officer. So my thanks to them and to Haji. My thanks to Mary Jane and her team and the African and Middle Eastern Division, and thanks to all of you for coming today. We at the library are honored to serve as the home for the preservation here in the United States of this extraordinary collection, and to serve as, we hope, careful stewards in making these historic images and sounds available as living documents to future generations, not only in Afghanistan and in the United States, but for the world's citizens. Thank you.
Different size there's on. But let us thank this panel of exceptional people and all the people behind them for the work that they have done. So let us give them a hand, because they've done a fantastic job.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.